All right, let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us in His commands, and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Jewelry did they have in the Iron Age, for the period that we're talking about here today? So, here we are in Second Kings. We're just right. We're still up here with Elisha. He's getting close to closing out his part, and so we're right about in here, and then in Chronicles. Well, I think we're going to be in 21 and 22. I still have Chronicles hidden from last week, so. And here again is where we're talking about some of the places that we will be talking about. Damascus is one, and then down here in Samaria is another, and Jerusalem, and right over in this area, there will be Ramoth Gilead, and that'll be in that area there. Okay. And then the kings. We're going to be looking at several kings here tonight, and one queen, actually, the only queen that Israel or Judah ever had, only queen that ever sat on David's throne, and she did so for about 8 years. And then over here in Israel, we'll be going through three kings there. And so that's where we are in our timeline. So, like I said, we had some. Pat's been making jewelry. She makes beaded jewelry and things like that. So these are some things that have been found in Iron Age type. This is the time, 1200 BCE to about 600 BCE. That time frame in Israel was called the Iron Age, and they got little little earring things here. And actually, we participated in a archaeological dig, and in this one place that we were looking at, there was an earring that had been found, and strangely enough, it looked just like an earring that Pat had, that set of earrings that she wore, like a little half moon with a little angel sitting on it. Well, while in this dig that we were at, the archaeologist guide there, was telling us that quite a few months or so before us, that somebody had found this. This little girl was there with her parents, and she looked down in the dirt and picked up this earring and said, "Hey, did somebody lose their earring?" Because here was a nice golden earring, and it looked great. And so as actually what it was is it was an earring from that era. Now it was actually from the Greek period. The Maccabean is actually post-Grecian era, and they said not very few weeks after that, then somebody found the mate to those earrings in that same dig that they were working on. And then when we were at the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem, we actually saw the earrings that this archaeologist was talking about. So that was quite interesting. That these earrings were found right in the same pit that they had us working in, and it was great. So these are earrings here, and this over here, the black thing, is kind of like where they would find it. This is the uncleaned up part of where they had found different pieces of jewelry. And so that's what it looked like when they were searching through stuff. So a lot of times you don't know what it is that you're looking for. And that would be, now here's another one, some rings that were from this period, and it's quite interesting that you would have that much detail in some of these things. And so here's one with seashells and carvings and so forth. Now the quite obviously, if you had jewelry that these ladies would be wearing that is gold and silver or precious stones in it, and basically the fineness of the work, and then the being gold or silver or gemstones, that would obviously indicate the social status of the wearer. The more expensive the jewelry, then the more the higher the income level and the socioeconomic level of the wearer. That just makes perfect sense. So the common folk, just the regular working folks, the ladies would be wearing maybe something out of seashells or wooden beads or little stone beads or something like that they could string together. And maybe it might have looked something like the one here that although that's pretty fancy there, but it would be something more simpler and not nearly as expensive as and so so we're trying to charge up our machines here. So anyway, that was all I had to do for jewelry during the Iron Age, because I couldn't come up with any pictures of a jeweler making jewelry in the Iron Age, or like I did last week, having the PhD lady making iron from the kilns and smelting like they would have perhaps in the Iron Age. So let's go into what we're going to be looking at tonight, because one of the first stories in our scriptures today are the Ben-Hadads. And who are these guys? And so the Ben-Hadad was mostly, I mean, it was a title, kind of like Pharaoh. It was a title, and it could have been, Tutankhamun or Ramesses or whoever the Pharaoh would have been. So this Ben-Hadad from Damascus would have been the title of the king. All right. And they're in the Bible. Let's see, Hadad or Hadad or Adad. I guess it probably the way you would pronounce it. But growing up in Texas, it turned out to be Hadad. But Hadad was the god of storm and thunder, and so the kings, a lot of times, they were the sons of this particular god or whatever. They viewed themselves as being a son of the god. And so there it is. Ben-Hadad was meaning son of Hadad, the storm god. And there were actually about three of them that we see in biblical history. And Ben-Hadad, the first, he ruled from about 900 to 860 BCE, and his son, Ben-Hadad the second, was from 860 to 841, and then his son met an untimely end at the hand of Hazael, and Hazael then reigned for a good long time, from 841 to 40 to 800. And then after him, his son, even though he was not of that lineage, was then his son was called Ben-Hadad the third. All right, Hazael's son. And it's interesting to note that Naaman, remember the guy who was healed from leprosy, was he served under Hazael. All right, so kind of tying some parts of these things together. Okay, and in the notes that I'll send out, they've got a lot more information about the king of Aram, which is Ben-Hadad. Okay, any comments or questions on those guys? Okay. In fact, we talked about him last week, where they did the siege on of Samaria, and where they were starving them to death. Okay, all right. So I talked about Hazael. Now we're going to try to get through several of these chapters here, about 4 or 5 chapters. I've never done that much before, and so I don't know that I'm going to get through it tonight, but we're going to see what happens. So looking at then slide, I think I'm up to number 8 here, but 2 Kings 8, 7 through 15. I'm just going to read through some of this stuff quickly, and then we'll talk about this. Then Elisha went to Damascus at the time King Ben-Hadad of Aram was sick, and was told, "The man of God has come all the way here." So the king said to Hazael, "Take an offering in your hand and go meet the man of God and inquire of Adonai by him, saying, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" So Hazael went to meet him and took an offering in his hand of every good thing in Damascus, 40 camel loads. Wow. Then came and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to you, saying, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" Elisha said to him, "Go say to him, 'You will surely recover.' However, Adonai has also shown me that he will surely die." He's telling this to Hazael, that he's going to die. Then he fixed his gaze steadily on him until he was ashamed. This is Elisha looking right at Hazael, and he just fixed his gaze steadily on him until he was ashamed. Hazael was ashamed. And then the man of God wept. Then Hazael said, "Why is my Lord weeping?" And he answered, "Because I know the evil that you will inflict on the men of Israel. Their strongholds you will set on fire. Their young men you will slay with the sword. Their little ones you will dash into pieces. And their pregnant ones you will rip open." Then Hazael said, "But what is your servant who is but a dog, that he should go do anything of such magnitude?" Elisha said, "Adonai has shown me that you will be king over Aram." Then he departed from Elisha and went to his master, who asked him, "What did Elisha say to you?" And he answered, "He told me that you would surely recover." But then the next day he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, spread it on his face so that he died. Then Hazael became king in his place. All right, so he waterboarded the king, and the king did not recover from that. So it says Elisha went to Damascus. Now we don't know. I read several commentators there that said, okay, well, Elisha went to Damascus at the behest of Ben-Hadad. Well, and then others have said that the Lord sent Elisha to Damascus to give him a message. So and then there's something in between all of those things, and so we don't really know uh, what the impetus was for Elisha to travel to Damascus. But we do know that he was there, and they. And you also remember that it was one of the kings, Ben-Hadad, of probably the one that was sick, had tried to kidnap Elisha because Elisha was telling the king of Israel all of his plans, because the Lord was revealing the plans of the Arameans, the Syrians, to Elisha, and then he would tell the king. And so every time that they tried to spring a trap, well, they would get caught, and that it was Israel could just easily avoid the trap. And so at one point they were kind of after him, but then remember, it was the king had sent Naaman, his general, or Naaman, to sent the Naaman down to Israel so that he could be healed of leprosy. He was healed of leprosy, and so now Elisha was held in great esteem in the court there in Damascus. Even though they were enemies, these guys knew that this prophet was a man of God, the God of Israel, and he was powerful, and so they held him in real high esteem at this point, and he was welcomed into the court of Ben-Hadad. And so that's why he asked him, okay, am I going to recover from this illness? Well, it's the word came back to him and says, yes, you will recover from the illness. In other words, you're not going to die from this illness. Okay, you're going to be okay from the illness, but you're still going to die. And so yeah, I'm sure that Ben-Hadad said, well, yeah, I'm gonna die someday, I'm sure, but at least I'm going to recover from this illness. And so um, then he's looking at the messenger that Ben-Hadad had sent to him, which was Hazael, and Elisha's just looking at him, just staring at him, to the point that he got really uncomfortable, and he was kind of embarrassed or ashamed, because Hazael already had it figured out that he was going to do harm, or he was looking for an opportunity to do harm to Ben-Hadad, because he had his thoughts on that throne. So Elisha just goes ahead and tells him, he said, no, the Lord has said that you will be an instrument of war, and it's going to be against Israel, and also you will be the king of Aram. So sure enough, he went back and told Ben-Hadad that, yeah, okay, Elisha said, you will recover from your illness. You're not going to die from your illness. And that's all he said. But then the very next day, said, he took a heavy cloth with water on it and soaked it, and then basically put it over his face, and he drowned and suffocated Ben-Hadad. And at that point, then he took over the throne. And so there we have the murder. All right, so and then I found some of these kind of things here about Hazael, and what some statues, and some of the things here where they actually found pieces of pottery or pieces of stone and so forth that had writing on it, and that actually spoke of the house of David. Right there, you can see right there. See, it's clear as day. House of David. All right, and that was inscribed at a place at Tel Dan. Now, Tel Dan is a city was a city in the northern part of Israel. That's where they had set up after the kingdom had split, and that's where they set up their government at the beginning. And there was a temple, there was an altar, then it was basically their the Israel's alternative to Jerusalem. Okay, the kingdom of Israel had their altar and their priests and all of that up there in Dan. So this is where they found that it talks about the house of David there. All right, and then here's some other of these steles that they have found. Just talking about the king of Aram and so forth. So just it verifies, or it legitimizes some of the writings in the Bible. So you can go back and look at these if you're interested in reading through some of these things. Okay, so comments or questions on that part so far? All right, now in the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat had been king of Judah. Jehoram, the son of King Jehoshaphat, became King Jehoshaphat of Judah became king. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab did. For Ahab's daughter was his wife, and he did what was evil in Adonai's eyes. Nevertheless, Adonai was not willing to destroy Judah for the sake of David, and since his servant, David his servant, since he had promised to give him a lamp for his children all days. In his days, Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and set up their own king. Then Joram crossed over to Zaire with all his chariots. It came about that he rose by night and struck the Edomites who had surrounded him and the chariot commanders, but his troops fled in their tents. So Edom kept rebelling under the hand of Judah to this day. Then Libnah also revolted at the same time. Now the rest of the acts of Joram and all he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Then Joram slept with his fathers, and he was buried with his fathers in the city of David. Then his son Ahaziah became king in his place. And we talked about this. This is in Chronicles 21. Remember that we went over this one last week or the week before. And how he was just a rotten king. Yeah, it just wasn't very popular at all, and just a rotten king. And he died of a terrible stomach ailment, and we don't really know what it was. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and so I grossed everybody out then, and so I'm not going to do that again. But he died from a terrible stomach ailment. And no, the worms, the question was it worms? No, it was more something that caused his intestines to burst, and it was pretty gross. All right, and so maybe nuclear constipation. I don't know. So then going ahead, then Elisha the prophet summoned one of the sons of the prophets and told him, strap up your cloak, take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you arrive there, look out there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Then go in, get him to arise from among his fellows and bring him to an inner room. Then take the flask of oil, pour it on his head, and said, thus says Adonai, I have anointed you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee. Don't wait around. So the young man, a young prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. Now when he arrived, behold, the army commanders were sitting. So he said, I have a word for you, commander. And Jehu said, asked, for which one of us? He said, for you, commander. Then he rose and went out inside the house, and the prophet poured the oil on his head and said to him, thus says Adonai, king of Israel, I have anointed you king over the people of Adonai, over Israel. So you will strike down the house of Ahab, your master, then I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, the blood of all the servants of Adonai shed by Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab will perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, slave or free in Israel, and I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasah, a son of Ahiah. And the dogs will eat Jezebel in the field of Jezreel, and there will be none to bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. Then Jehu came out to the officers of his master, and one asked him, is everything all right? Why did this crazy fella come to you? He said, this man is babbling. And they said, that's a lie. Tell us. So he said, okay. He said something like this to me, saying, thus says Adonai, I have anointed you king over Israel. Then they hurried, and every man took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps, and blew the shofar and said, Jehu is king. So right there, we don't know that. He said it to his other commanders there, and it's kind of like they were in a way mocking him that he was going to be the king. So that's one of the interpretations of it, that they went out there and spread their cloaks on the stairway for him, and for him to come down the escalator and say, Jehu is king, long live the king. And so maybe that's what it was. Maybe they looked at it and said, okay, if this is the case, then we better jump on board real quickly and let him know that we're on his side. So I thought it was interesting that Elisha sent a son of the prophets to go over there. He didn't do it himself. Now, why is this? Maybe Elisha is getting older, and he didn't want to make that trip from where he was in Samaria all the way back over to Ramoth Gilead, because that's a hike. I mean, that's it could be a couple of weeks over there and back. For an old prophet, that would be tough. So he sent one of the younger men there. But it's interesting. He says, go there, anoint him, and then get the heck out of Dodge. Get away from there very quickly. Leave. Don't stick around. And why was that? We don't really know. Would he have been in danger? We don't know. Or would it have led to further questioning and so forth? That's a possibility too. So anyway, his young man did exactly as he was told, gave him the message, and then he fled quickly, got out of Ramoth Gilead, went and came back home. So then the prophecy there was that this prophet gave to him was that he was going to go in and wipe out everything that pertained to Ahab, killing all of his descendants, his servants, anything and everything associated with Ahab. And you think, okay, why is that so severe? Well, remember what the reign of Ahab and Jezebel was like, that they were so evil in God's sight. Everything that they did was evil. And so they had turned the entire nation against God. And so he said, okay, it is time for judgment. And so that's what that was about. Any comments or questions? Okay, so then Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had been, he was the king of Israel, and he had been defending Ramoth Gilead against the Syrians, the Arameans, and he and all Israel against King Hazael. Okay, remember Hazael had just killed the Ben-Hadad there, and but King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from wounds that the Arameans had inflicted on him. when he fought with King Hazael of Aram. Then Jehu said, if it is your wish, then let no one escape and go out of the city to go tell the news in Jezreel. And so, meaning, says, okay, none of this stuff about the anointing as king and so forth has got to leave here. It can leave here. So Jehu mounted a chariot, went to Jezreel, for Joram was lying there. Meanwhile, King Ahaziah of Judah came down to see Joram. And now the watchman stationed on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's troop approaching, and he says, I'm seeing a troop. Then Joram said, take a horseman and dispatch him to meet them, and let him ask, is it peace? And so the horse rider went to meet him and says, thus says the king, is it peace? Jehu said, what do you have to do with peace? Turn behind me. Just get on behind me here. And so the watchman reported, said, the messenger reached them, but he didn't come back. Then he dispatched another horseman and went out, and thus said the king, is it peace? Jehu said again, what do you have to do with peace? Turn behind me. So the watchman reported, saying, he reached them, but he didn't come back. And then the driving is like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshi, for he is driving like a maniac. And then Joram ordered, hitch up the chariot. So he hitched up his chariot. Then King Joram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah went out to each in his chariot to meet Jehu, and found him at the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. Okay, now one of the reasons you got to remember here, they didn't know that Jehu had been anointed as the king. They still looked at Jehu as a loyal subject of Joram. They didn't look at him as an enemy. That's one of ours. In fact, he's one of my generals, and so he drives a chariot a little crazy, but he's still one of our. He's an ally. He's a friend, and so. Then they hitched up their chariots and they went out there, and they found him in the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. Now, do you remember who Naboth the Jezreelite was? He was the man who had a nice vineyard orchard, and a piece of property. And Ahab said, ooh, I sure would like to have that piece of property so I could grow veggies right here next to the palace. And Naboth said, no, I can't do that because this is family land. I can't sell it to you. Well, Jezebel had him killed so that then Ahab could have this land. And that's when the prophecy came about that, Ahab and Jezebel were going to, both of them have horrible endings. And so that's where they were at, on that very field of Naboth the Jezreelite. So now when Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? And he says, what peace? So long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. So Joram turned his horses around and fled, crying out to Ahaziah, treason, Ahaziah. But Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between his arms, and the arrow went out through his heart, and he collapsed in his chariot. Then he said to Bidkar, his aide, pick him up and throw him on the property of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together behind Ahab his father when Adonai took up this burden against him? As surely as I have seen the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons yesterday, it is a declaration of Adonai. I will repay you on this property. It is a declaration of Adonai. So now pick him up and throw him onto the property, just as in the word of Adonai. When King Ahaziah of Judah saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house, but Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him too. So they shot him in the chariot at Gur Pass near Ibleam. Then he fled to Megiddo, but he died there. And when his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers of the city of David. Ahaziah had become king over Judah in the 11th year of Joram, Joram, the son of Ahab. Okay, so at this point, we see that Joram was there. Ramoth Gilead had been injured, he'd been wounded, so he was recovering. And the king of Judah then had gone up to Jezreel went back to up there to Jezreel, and went up to Ramoth Gilead, and so because he was supposedly sick, well, he was wounded. And remember, these guys are related by marriage, and so the king of Israel and king of Judah at this point were allies, and they weren't always, but at this point they were. And so that's when Jehu went there, and that's why he had said, "Don't anybody leave Jezreel, because I don't want this to get out." And so that's why he was able for them to come so close to him. And then Jehu shot the arrow, killing Joram, and also then he shot his men shot at and hit Ahaziah, and he eventually died in Megiddo. But then so basically what I've talked about, that where Joram's body was thrown into the field of Naboth. Naboth had this field there near Ramoth Gilead, and so that's when it was family property. And so when it's just fitting that the son of the man who killed Naboth was then be killed and thrown out into that field for the jackals and the buzzards and everybody to get him. He was not buried. Okay, comments or questions? All right, now, are you getting confused by all these names and everything? Well, I hope so, because I stayed confused all this week while I was trying to study for this thing. So I didn't want anybody I didn't want to feel inadequate if y'all were not going to be confused here. All right, so 2 Kings 9 and 30, and then Jehu arrived at Jezreel. Jezebel heard about it, so she painted her eyes and dressed her hair and looked out the window. And my goodness, I don't know what she was thinking about, because by this time she would be well past her prime, let's say, okay? And as Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, your master's assassin?" Then he lifted up his face to the window and called, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs who attended to Jezebel looked down toward him. And then he told them, he says, "Throw her down." So they just threw her down. Then her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled her. And then he went inside and ate and drank. So Jehu was not too awful upset that Jezebel was gone. Then he said, "Attend now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." But when they went to bury her, they found no more than her skull, the feet, and the palms of her hands. So they came back and told him about it. And he said, "This is the word of Adonai, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, in the field of Jezreel will the dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel, and then the carcass of Jezebel will be as dung upon the face of the field in the property of Jezreel, so they will not say, this was Jezebel." Basically, what he's saying there is that she was basically torn apart after she had fallen. Dogs or whatever just tore her apart. Only thing was left was, her hands, feet, and the skull. The body was taken away, and then that way nobody could bury her and say, "Ah, here is the tomb of our beloved Jezebel or whatever, and it was the ultimate of insults to her and her carcass, her body, is that she was not going to be able to be buried because she didn't exist anymore. So, and all those things, that was a prophecy that Elijah had told Ahab, and it happened exactly like this. So, I mean, this is, 30, 40 years later now that this had happened. So, but going back to, going back up there to where Jezebel, she's painted herself up, I guess, thinking that she was going to sway Jehu, but yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work. That was just, that's what she had relied on all her life, and it, she was well past her prime, and Jehu was on a mission. So he had already determined that he was going to have her executed, and so nothing was going to dissuade him from that mission. So, any comments or questions? All right, going ahead. And we're kind of backtracking a little bit here because these stories overlapped. There's a little bit of an overlap, and you can't hardly tell one of them with the story of this king or that king, with that going through and telling that whole story, and then the other king, but they were kings together. So you have to kind of do some backtracking then to just catch yourself up. In the 12th year of Joram, son of King Ahab of Israel, Ahaziah, son of King Joram of Judah, began to reign. Remember, we've already talked about him getting killed. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, and the daughter of King Omri of Israel. He walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did what was evil in Adonai's eyes, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was a son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he marched with Joram, son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. But the Arameans wounded Joram, so King Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds that the Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramah, and he fought against King Hazael. When he fought against King Hazael of Aram, Ahaziah, son of King Jehoram of Judah, went down to see Joram, son of Ahab, in Jezreel, just because he was sick. All right, and so then. Okay, so that kind of tells how that Ahaziah had come to power, but he was only in there for 1 year, and then he got killed. So, and here's a picture of some of the battles and so forth that Ben-Hadad had fought against Israel. And here's Jezreel and Megiddo right here, and Ramoth Gilead over here. So these are some of their battles that they had. Okay, so Athaliah reigns in Judah. Now, this next week we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about her and a little bit more on what she does. And so going ahead with had that map. Okay, now looking at 2 Chronicles 22, 10 and 12. Then Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son had died. She arose and destroyed all the royal offspring of the house of Judah. But Jehoshaphat, the king's daughter, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being slain, and put him and his nurse in the bedroom. because Jehoshaphat, the daughter of the king Jehoram, and the wife of Jehoiada, the Kohen, was the sister of Ahaziah. She could hide him from Athaliah so that she could not kill him. He remained hidden with them in the house of God for 6 years while Athaliah reigned over the land. All right, now the question is, okay, I don't know if you caught this, but Athaliah rose and destroyed all the royal offspring in the house of Judah. All right, now who was the royal offspring in the house of Judah? These were none other than her own grandsons. Okay, did you catch that? This lady was so evil that she went out and killed her own grandsons so that no one would have a claim to the throne. All right, and we see that in several other places in the history of Israel and Judah, where, and most notably, much later on, when Herod the Great psychopath there, killed, all of his family, and even killed his wife, who was that was his favorite wife, favorite person, and he even killed her when he thought that she might be a threat to him, and then he regretted it, but still, it was just a mean, nasty thing to do. So this lady Athaliah, who was she? Her name means afflicted by God, and she was the queen of Judah from 841 to 835 BCE, the only female monarch to sit on David's throne in biblical history. Athaliah was the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel, and she married Jehoram, the eldest son of Judah's king Jehoshaphat. Okay, her time as queen is nestled amid centuries of evil monarchs who reigned over Judah and Israel. And so she was an avid Baal zealot. She worshipped the god, the little g god Baal. And Athaliah rivaled the wickedness of the kings who came before her and after her. And I mean, she was just as bad and nasty as any of them. And her story, like I said, can be found in 2 Kings 11 and 2 Chronicles 22 to 23. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit more next week with Athaliah, because we're going to have to, just too much things to get one more chapter in tonight. So I think we've covered her. We're going to kind of leave it at that. She reigned for about 8 years, and then next week we'll see where she will meet her own demise. But fortunately, Joash was saved, and then he had good, godly people raising him up. And then when he became king at the age of 7 or 8, then through his basically through the high priest, they had Athaliah dispatched. But we'll talk about that next week, and talk again about how Jehu slaughters Ahab's descendants. And this was methodical. Jehu had a plan. He'd go through there, and here he is, sent letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of Jezreel, the elders and the guardians of Ahab's sons, saying, "Now, as soon as this letter reaches you, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city and weapons, choose the best and the most worthy of your sons, set him up in his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." But they were terrified and said, "No, look, 2 kings couldn't stand before him. How can we?" So the steward of the palace, the governor of the city, the elders, the guardian sent word to Jehu, said, "We are your servants. We will do whatever you tell us to do. And so we won't make any man king. Do whatever is good in your eyes." Then he wrote a second letter to them, says, "If you are on my side, if you will obey me, then bring the heads of the men, your master's sons," all of the king's sons there, Ahab's 70 sons that he had, and behead them and bring them to me here in Jezreel. So that's exactly what they did. They killed all of these guys and sent their heads in baskets to Jezreel. And so when the messenger came, told him, saying, "Okay, they brought the heads of the king's sons to you," and he says, "Okay, put them out there in the gate." So 70 heads are sitting out there at the gate, and so he's telling, basically it was a show of strength and a show of just barbaric abilities there, and he got everybody's attention. And so then going on in the scriptures, so Jehu struck down all those who remained in the house of Ahab of Jezreel, all his nobles, his acquaintances, his priests, until he left him not a survivor. Then he rose and went on his way to Samaria. As he was at the shearing house of the shepherds along the way, Jehu met with the kinsman of King Ahaziah of Judah. Now remember, King Ahaziah of Judah was also related to King Ahab and Jezebel. Says, "Who are you?" Then the king, "We are the kinsmen of Ahaziah," thinking that that's give them a protection. "We've come down to greet the children of the king and the children of the queen mother." And Jehu said, "Take them alive." And so they took them alive, and then they killed them all. They executed them all at the pit at the shearing house. 42 men, and he spared not a single one of them. Now, when he left from there, he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, coming to meet him. So he greeted him and said, "Is your heart right as my heart is with your heart?" And it is, Jehonadab required. If it is, give me your hand. So they shook hands. Jehu helped him up into his chariot, and he says, "Come with me and see my zeal for Adonai." Then he let him ride in his chariot. When he came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained from Ahab in Samaria until he destroyed him, according to the word of Adonai spoken to Elijah. So the legacy and every part of Ahab's reign, all of his family, everything, all of that evil was destroyed. Just like when Israel was supposed to, the early Israelites were supposed to go through Canaan and destroy or dispatch, get rid of, displace all of the evil that was in Canaan. They didn't do it. Well, this was a smaller scale, but Jehu did exactly like that. He got rid of all of Ahab and everything about Ahab. So then Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much." Okay, so he's creating a ruse there to get everybody together. "Now, therefore, summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers and all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing will not live." But Jehu did it in cunning in order to destroy the worshipers of Baal. So then Jehu said, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal." So they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent throughout Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. When he went into the temple of Baal, the temple of Baal was filled from one end to the other. And he said to the one over the wardrobe, "Bring out vestments for all of the worshipers of Baal." So they brought out vestments for them. And then Jehu and Jehonadab, son of Rechab, went into the temple of Baal. And he said to the worshipers of Baal, "Search and look that there is here with you none of those servants of Adonai, only servants of Baal." So they went in, and they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now, Jehu had already stationed 80 of his men outside and said, if any of the men whom I am bringing into your hands to escape, your life will be for his life. So in other words, you let any of these guys escape, you're going to die. And so then it came to pass, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and the captains, "Go in and strike them down, let none get out." So they struck down everybody with the edge of the sword, and the guards and the captains threw them out. So they'd kill them, throw them out of the temple, kill them, throw them out of the temple. And then they proceeded into the inner room in the temple of Baal and brought out the pillars of the temple of Baal and burned them. Then they demolished the pillar of Baal, tore down the temple of Baal, and turned it into a latrine, as it is to this day. The ultimate insult for a temple is to then turn it into an outhouse. Okay, and so that's pretty self-explanatory there. I mean, Jehu had a plan. He was sneaky, conniving, and he got everybody, and he killed. He wiped out all of Baal worship in Israel. Quite an accomplishment. And so, thus, Jehu eradicated Baal from Israel. However, from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he caused Israel to commit, from these Jehu did not turn away. The golden calves in Bethel and Dan. Okay, so that he didn't get rid of those, because why? Those were the gods of his own particular family and ancestors. Now, Adonai had said to Jehu, because you've done well in executing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation will sit on the throne of Israel. Yet Jehu was not careful to walk in the Torah of Adonai, God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he caused Israel to commit. In those days Adonai began to reduce the size of Israel, for Hazael defeated them through the territory of Israel from the Jordan eastward, and in all of the land of Gilead, the Gadites and Reubenites. Okay, so all that good land that they had over there in okay, I didn't finish the scripture. Let me finish that, and then I'll go back into the comment. And so from Aroer by the Arnon Valley up to Gilead, Bashan, now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Israel? Then Jehu slept with his father, and they buried him in Samaria, and his son Jehoaz became king in his place. The days of Jehu's reign in Samaria were 28 years. All right. So he went through there. He did not eradicate the false gods that they had, the golden calves. Okay. That was basically his heritage. And so he didn't destroy those. He just destroyed the things from Baal. And so as a result, God said, okay, because you've done good things, I am then going to keep you and your people, your family in power for 4 generations. But because he had done this, Israel started losing land. They started losing control, and so they lost the land, started losing land over on the east side of the Jordan River, and that was excellent land. That was, even to this day, some of the finest land in that area, and farmland over that in Jordan, that's what it is today, is Jordan. Very, very good land. There's a lot of olive groves and stuff like that. So they lost valuable land that Israel has never actually regained, because of the sin of not cleaning house in Israel. All right. So, all right, I did get through it in 1 hour, and I just, but there's quite a few things there that maybe I just kind of glossed over, and it would have been kind of fun to jump in on some of it. But I want to keep flowing in this history of Israel, and because I know some people, they're just not really turned on about history, but I think it's fascinating